Hi, Professor. I know this is coming in a little bit late, pretty much about an hour late. I was cutting it too close, and I guess it did not submit. Um, so I just wouldn't feel right if I didn't send it to you. Thought I wrote a pretty good one. I understand if I don't get any points. It's all my fault, completely my fault. But it just wouldn't sit well if I didn't at least do the briefing. So here it goes. Thank you for including me in this discussion when it comes to U.S. national security policy and what is the defining element when it comes to U.S. national security policy and how that impacts the intelligence requirements. Uh, when you're talking about the media and that theory that is the defining element, there is a lot of good information, a lot of good evidence to suggest that. One being the Church Committee that happened in the 1975 when it comes to investigating the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and other intelligence agencies' practices when it comes to gathering intel and conducting investigations in the matters of national security. What they did find out shocked a lot of Americans when it was made public through the media. Uh, there was a lot of secret illegal wiretapping, bugging, harassments of American citizens, including Supreme Court justices, reporters, government officials, and even like civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King. And this was all in the name of collecting intelligence against for matters of national security. But when you look at that issue and how the media um, publicizes that and publicizes the most recent one, Edward Snowden, it does affect a little bit of national security policy or how we conduct our intelligence gathering, like Sarkeesian, Williams, and Simbala mentions in their book, U.S. National Security Policymakers, Processes, and Politics, that when they found out publicly, when the public, not just the American public, but the world public found out about how the CIA conducts these investigations, it hurt CIA foreign relations relationships with how foreign sources or human sources were less inclined to trust CIA effectiveness since it couldn't keep its own secrets from the American people. However, if we're looking at the actual question of what is the defining element of national security policy and how that affects us, that didn't affect what our priorities were when it came to in the 1970s. The Soviet Union was still a threat. We were still combating them to protect Western Europe, and we also uh, changed our national security policy with our relationship with China to create like a split between the Soviets and the Chinese. It was the Soviet-Sino alliance that we kind of split effectively, in my opinion, in the 1970s, and that would have happened even if all the information about the intelligence spying on Americans and all the illegal activities, questionably illegal activities that were going on in the 1970s, it would still not have stopped us for dealing with the Soviet Union. Domestically, we dealt with domestic far left communist terrorist groups like the Weather Underground, the New World Liberation Front, the Symbionese Liberation Army. They set off hundreds of bombs within the United States that the FBI had to investigate. And all the media did was kind of take away some of the tools we were using, arguably unconstitutional tools, but they took them away, but we were still having to deal with those threats. So we would just have to how we were dealing with those threats, not if we were going to deal with those threats or the threats change based on what the media portrayed us doing. The second theory is about U.S. obligations to treaties and alliances being the defining element, and that's interesting to me. I've never actually thought of it that way, and there is a good case for it. However, I would say that that is kind of a backwards approach because it always comes back to how we can change those alliances when it comes to national security policies. We might have to work around them, but it doesn't change our national security policies. One of the best most recent, well, it's not the most recent, it's uh, you know, it was recent when I was younger, but when the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks happened, President Bush changed our relationship with Pakistan in order to effectively work in the war on terror, namely in our Afghanistan front of the war on terror, fighting Al Qaeda and the Taliban. Before 9/11, the September 11th attacks, they were not our ally. And after that, initially, after the attacks initially, they were called a non-NATO ally in the war on terror. And we got pretty close to them when it came to working with, um, fighting anti-terrorism operations. We actually caught one of the, uh, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. We caught him in Pakistan, so they helped us with that. However, like all treaties and relationships, sometimes things cool. And when we got into the Obama era, or the President Obama's administration, it cooled because we increased drone strikes in that country, and we ultimately found Osama bin Laden literally hiding not very far away from what we would call like of the West Point of Pakistan. It was an officers' academy, and he was probably hiding there for years. And so that kind of shows that ultimately it's the president that's going to change our policy when it comes to how we dictate treaties and alliances. Another President Bush incident is when we went into Iraq, when we invaded Iraq. That didn't make our allies France and Germany very happy. It actually soured a little bit with us. We're still working with them in other fields, but that didn't change us going into Iraq. We still actually went into Iraq. We can question if that was a good policy or not, but it wasn't changed because of our treaties and obligations to France and Germany. So that ultimately brings up that the third theory, the public perception of the presidential office, the leadership and style of the sitting president, their mindset and perception of external threats, and their authority establishing cabinet positions is what defines national security policy, and thus the intelligence requirements that we face. Uh, they're going to listen to the Director of National Intelligence. They're going to listen to the Secretary of Defense. They're going to listen to all the National Security Council when it comes to that. And we are going to give them intelligence products of what could be emerging threats, but it's ultimately going to be the president picking how to best deal with that. And let's go back to the Pakistan example. Right now, we're continuously going to cool off with them in the near future because we are allying ourselves more with India to basically deal with the emerging China's influence within that region. President Obama started that. It was kind of called the Asia pivot, where we pivoted a lot of our national security policies into there because the disputes in the South China Sea and with Japan when it comes to territory. Asia's kind of pushing their might a little bit since they're getting stronger, and we're thinking that India would be a good strategic ally, but that's going to cool off the relationship with Pakistan. However, something comes up, we might have to readjust those alliances. So hence it will be the president picking is the defining element when it comes to that issue. Let's say take a hypothetical situation where we find Osama bin Laden in England. That wouldn't change just because we have a treaty or policy with England. It wouldn't change that our national strategy was to kill or capture the person that instigated the terrorist attacks on September 11th. We would just have to work around it. We'd probably use most of their host nation forces, and we probably wouldn't send the SEALs in without at least telling them. So ultimately, it is the president that I feel is the defining element. Thank you for your time. I'm going to keep this under 10 minutes because that was basically how much time I had when it comes to recording it on D2L. And hopefully you enjoy this. Like I said, if I don't get any points or if I just get half points, hopefully you enjoy it. And thank you for your time. I apologize for the lateness. I cut it too close and it was my fault 100%. Thank you. Bye.